Okay, welcome everyone. So my name is Patrick Paul Walsh. I'm the Vice President for Education at SDSN and Director of the SDG Academy, and I'm going to moderate today. Welcome everyone online and obviously everyone in the room. So today we're actually going to talk about an issue around thematic action track 4 on digital learning and transformation. And we've called it Transforming Education for Sustainable Development with FAIR, OERRs, Digital Innovation and Diamond Partnerships. So we will, at the end of the day, get to know what FAIR means, findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable, and OERs are open education resource repositories. But we'll see why this is so important when we talk about education, curriculum and resources as a global public good that can be accessible all around the world and shared all around the world, right? So this is what we're looking at. So today's event, I'm delighted to say, is supported by the Irish government and the Irish Mission in New York. In fact, it's the Department of Education, Irish Aid and the people in New York have coordinated, which we're delighted about. And we have the ambassador here, Ambassador Gerard Keown, who's the permanent representative of Ireland to UNESCO. Just a little bit about Gerard. He's a career diplomat, but I knew him because of the work he actually has written. He's got good articles and a book on Irish foreign policy, actually, and that's how I knew him. Actually.
Mechanical.
So that's interesting.
No, they're by the bed.
Okay.
So hopefully everyone is muted online. So please only open up the channel when you're speaking, and that goes for people in the room as well. And obviously, he has a PhD from a DPhil from Oxford, so I think that's excellent. So he's both a career diplomat and an academic in a lot of ways. So I'm going to let the ambassador have a few opening remarks and introduce the Minister, Simon Harris from Ireland.
Many thanks for that very generous introduction. It's a great pleasure to me to be here today as Ireland's ambassador to UNESCO to open this really important event. And I'd like to welcome all of you who are here in the room, but of course also those who are joining online. And I look forward to being part of your deliberations. Let me at the outset thank those who've been involved in organizing today's event, in particular the rich panel of experts who are going to share their experience and their thinking on innovation in the field of third level education and its role in driving change, progress and development. I'm particularly delighted we will be joined by Jeffrey Sachs, who of course requires no introduction to a gathering of this kind. And a special word of thanks also to our moderator, Professor Patrick Paul Walsh. I look forward to hearing your collective imagining around the possibilities that digital innovation can provide to help transform education. Education is central to Ireland's story as a country and a people. We've seen its transformative power, how investment in our education systems and in our people has been an investment in our future, the bedrock to our social, political and economic development. And of course, here in these walls at UNESCO, we understand clearly that with education comes development. That is why SDG 4 is so important, for without progress towards achieving sustainable, equitable access to education for everyone, we will struggle to achieve the SDGs as a whole. Education is the key to addressing global challenges and charting pathways to progress and development for each of our countries, communities, and societies. SDG 4 and Target 4.7 in particular set out the future that education can bring: sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, cultural diversity, and a culture of inclusion. In Ireland, we're working to extend the footprint and impact of education for sustainable development. And a second national strategy in this area to 2030 was recently launched. Mission 4.7 brings together expertise from a diverse range of sectors across government, education, and industry to help us all consider the significant global challenges we face. Today's event, of course, exemplifies the kind of collaborative thinking that Mission 47 envisages. But we need a holistic approach that encompasses provision of education throughout the education cycle and the lifetimes of the learner, from early years education through the school system to third level and vocational education, the continuum of lifelong learning and skills development. In Ireland, one of the innovations of our current government was to create a ministry with responsibility for further and higher education, research, innovation, and science to bring together these fundamental threads in one single administrative unit. The strategic goals of the ministry are directly aligned to Mission 4.7 by uniting the forces of education, research, science, and industry. This is helping Ireland to consider and solve many of the problems that we all face, and helping education, research, and science to be collective, sustainable economic drivers. Ireland's first minister in this new portfolio is Simon Harris, who has previously served as our Minister for Health and our Minister for State with responsibility for international banking. Minister Harris would very much like to have been here present for this event to join the discussion and to set out his thinking. He's asked me to convey to you each his good wishes and his encouragement to each of you in the important work you're doing as innovators in education. While other commitments unfortunately mean the Minister is not able to be here with us in person, he has set out Ireland's vision and his vision in this key field of global education in the video message. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Ireland's Minister for Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, Mr. Simon Harris. Thank you.
Hello there, and I'm delighted to open this session today alongside Jeffrey Sachs, a renowned economist and professor at Columbia University, as well as serving as president of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. The Irish government is very happy to support this event, having played a significant role in the development of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Mission 4.7 brings leaders together, leaders from government, from academia, from civil society and business, to accelerate the implementation of transformative education for sustainable development around the world. The global challenges that we face today are truly those that cannot be solved by any one sector alone, nor by any one country alone. The need to bring experts from across many disciplines together to solve issues such as climate change and inequality is increasingly critical, as is the need to ensure that knowledge is shared as widely as possible, whether this be to enterprise, to the citizen, or to the public sector. We need to ensure that evidence-based policy making is at the heart. Education for Sustainable Development, ESD, is a key element of the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, contributing to the 5 Ps: people, planet, peace, prosperity, and partnerships. ESD promotes and supports the development of those requisite skills, knowledge and dispositions that help everyone to take action for a sustainable future and a sustainable planet. Ireland is absolutely committed to addressing these challenges, and I recently had the honour of launching Ireland's second national strategy on ESD out to 2030. This is a strategy which will provide a framework to steer and support the contribution that the education sector is making and will continue to make towards a sustainable future by 2030. Our strategy focuses on lifelong learning, learning from the cradle to the grave. We'll extend sustainability education beyond the formal education systems out to communities and to enterprise. Ireland's approach has sought to ensure that ESD is viewed by all as good practice and that it becomes an embedded commitment to transforming our lives and our world, rather than just an additional demand or expectation upon those delivering or those receiving education. A key part of this is ensuring that ESD is embedded into our policy and operational frameworks to transform our learning environments. Sustainability and inclusion need to be at the very heart of education, with these principles not only embedded in our teaching and our learning and our research, but also in the way that we manage and govern our educational environments and our partnerships with local communities and with local enterprise too. Higher education institutions have a really vital role to play, as they're at the very centre of an intergenerational transfer and creation of knowledge for sustainable development. They play a key role in developing the capacity of our educators, as well as training our leaders for the future. The experience of the pandemic has taught us that working together has never been so important. It has demonstrated the critical importance of research and science in responding to a global pandemic, and this needs to be emphasised and amplified across all global challenges, in particular those challenges that are captured through the Sustainable Development Goals. I believe that a key role for government is to create the favourable conditions or the right environment within which ideas, research and innovation can flourish. Last month I launched Impact 2030. This is Ireland's research and innovation strategy. A key objective of the strategy is for the research and the innovation system to make as big a difference as possible to as many people as possible. This can be achieved and will be achieved through working together, working across academia, enterprise, the public sector, and working with the community, with citizens, to find solutions to challenges and to seek out opportunities. It's vital that educational resources and tools are accessible so that people and communities are empowered to make a real difference in their lives. This session will explore this theme further, considering how we can widen access to educational resources, to data and to curricula, perhaps through digital innovation for sustainable development. The SDGs are a priority for all of us as global citizens, and through Goal 4, quality education, and Target 4.7, we can drive and support real transformation and change towards a better future for all. By working together in innovative ways, we can and we will achieve positive change. Thank you all.
Thank you. So that was a very nice statement by Minister Simon Harris, and I'm delighted that Ireland are taking this forward and have their strategic plan going forward to 2030 on education for sustainable development. So let me introduce Jeffrey Sachs. So Jeffrey Sachs is a university professor in Columbia University, and he is president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. So I think most of you know him. I don't have to go through his CV, but I thought I'd tell you something that you may not know, which is he actually is what I would call an innovator in education, and maybe not stressed as much on his websites and bios as you might see before. So just to give you some idea, I think Joe Stiglitz and Jeff Sachs introduced one of the first PhDs in sustainable development in Columbia University. Also, I think when Jeff was in, could people mute when they're online? Be good, thank you. Also, when Jeff was teaching in Columbia University, he certainly would bring in people from the UN, and he'd bring in people from NGOs and corporates. So there was a real science practice policy interface going on in his classrooms. But he was quite determined that this conversation would not only be in Columbia University, in the sense that this has to get out there. And that's what the SDG Academy is about, is to try and outreach to every corner of the world and have the global classrooms where everyone can talk science policy interface on the SDGs. And this is definitely the spirit of what Jeff does every day in terms of going into Parliament and going into NGOs and corporates, convincing all of us to get on the pathways to sustainable development. So I'll hand it over to you, Jeff.
Paul, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly well.
Excellent. Well, colleagues, thank you very much. Ambassador, thank you so much for hosting us. And also, please thank Minister Harris for his wonderful remarks and for his leadership. And I want to thank the Government of Ireland for all of the leadership that you have shown on the Sustainable Development Goals from the very beginning, and we can say even from before the beginning, because David McDonough, one of your globally renowned diplomats, one of your many globally renowned diplomats, of course, helped to negotiate and formulate the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. His role was absolutely essential. I have been special advisor to the Secretary General on the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. There were 8 MDGs and 17 SDGs. And when I was advising on the MDGs, I was often asked which is the most important, and I always refused to answer because they're all important. It's a holistic agenda. When I'm asked the same about the SDGs, I always answer SDG 4 is the most important. It really is the most important. Without education, everything else is hopeless. Our societies are hopeless. They won't hold together. Our need for a sophisticated global approach to sustainable development, it would be completely out of reach. Economic development in poor countries doesn't have a chance unless we have a dramatic upscaling of the quantity and the quality of education. It's urgent. Let me tell you just in 1 minute, and I won't belabor the point, I've been 22 years advising the UN leadership on these global goals. I don't get it, but we don't fund education. We just don't fund global education. It's pathetic. It's tragic, more than pathetic, and it's weird. We now have a new global partnership for infrastructure and investment launched by the G7 a couple of days ago. That's supposed to be $600 billion over 5 years. Education is not mentioned. It's for hardware, not for brainware, not for software. This is true for 22 years that I've been advising Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon, and Antonio Guterres. We have something called the Global Partnership for Education. It's about $700 million a year. Very nice organization. Completely the wrong scale. I don't get what's wrong with our world, because getting kids in school should be the no-brainer of the whole world. But it's not, and we're not doing it. And final point on this, then I'll turn to our topic. Poor countries cannot afford to provide education, period, on the budgets that they have. I'm telling you as a macroeconomist, this isn't a matter of choice, goodwill, public leadership. It's a matter of poverty. You want kids in high school, we're going to have to help the low-income countries to do that. We need education finance, or the kids won't finish high school. And the girls won't even finish lower secondary school. So this is absolutely basic. Now, let me turn to our topic, which is how digital can change all of this. Digital is an incredibly powerful tool. We know it, we talk about it, we don't apply it properly at a global level. As Paul mentioned, I've been hosting a global classroom for 14 years because I said, why don't we connect kids together and our campuses together? At the beginning, it was pretty complicated. You needed a telephone operator, you needed 30 minutes to get groups online. Okay, now everybody can click on a Zoom. We should be doing so much more of this. Live classrooms, interconnected classrooms, global partnerships. And this is not only for university students, it should be for primary and secondary school students so that they see we're in a world. We're not just in our local village or local community or local city, we're in a world. And if American and Chinese young people would be talking with each other, we wouldn't have what we have right now, which is a disaster of diplomats yelling at each other because they don't know each other. It's the only reason, by the way, that they yell, because there's so much prejudice, so much bias, so little knowledge. So we need young people to be connected, and we should be using digital technologies for this. Now, SDSN's Mission 4.7 aims to both curate a curriculum, and Radhika Yangar will talk about that, and she is helping to lead this process together with Paul of putting together an appropriate curriculum for every level, from lower school all the way through continuing adult education. SDG Academy has more than 30 MOOCs available for free. And I'm happy to say I meet people all over the world who are taking these classes for free, because that's a good way to do it. And a good way to get this out. So Mission 4.7 is one specific part of the puzzle, and that is how to help every learner learn about sustainable development. And as the ambassador said, not just, and the minister said, not just about climate and the environmental issues, but about citizenship, tolerance, cross-cultural appreciation, culture of peace, which could not be more important or more missing, unfortunately, in our world right now. So first point I want to make is curate education for sustainable development. Get it online, help to have an appropriate curriculum, of course, finance so that kids are actually in school. Second point, we should be using digital for very low cost access to university education, almost for free. I propose this, I have to say, at my own university, they said it doesn't fit our business model, but it has to fit somebody's business model for online mass free higher education, because we need a whole generation of hundreds of millions of young people to learn at the tertiary level. And this is the beauty of online. I can reach, or any of us can reach, thousands of students in a lecture. And of course, by using online tutoring, you can have a tutor in one continent and a student in another continent. You can have office hours that are worldwide. We can do so much more now with the tools that we have. So low-cost online higher education, please. We're trying to roll that out for especially African young people because the need is urgent, and I think a great deal can be done. Another point is, of course, using digital for hard to reach. I've been working in villages with Radhika in Africa and in remote rural areas of India. Africa's a much bigger challenge, actually, these days. But there are places where you can't get a qualified teacher, or you may have a qualified generalist, but not somebody who can teach math or can teach science or can teach other subjects. But connecting the young people with a teacher in the city who is teaching online to kids in villages nearby or not nearby for that matter, but who is an expert in the subject matter and who can train local teachers or help them with the curriculum. This is another absolute must. Another point that I'd like to emphasize, which was mentioned by all of the previous speakers, by the minister, by the ambassador, by Paul, is that in our age where we need a new direction on the planet, we need new technologies, we need an overhaul of the energy system, we need an overhaul of the agriculture system. We're living through a digital revolution that is at least as great as the first industrial revolution, and I would say as important as electrification was to our societies. There's going to be a tremendous change of jobs and skills needed for decades to come. And so we're going to need lifelong learning in a serious way. And Paul has been thinking up really creative and innovative models for micro degrees, mini degrees, accreditations, ways to have a new kind of design. My wife's a medical doctor, so I watched her go back to school every year in what's called in the United States continuing medical education. She had to get a certain number of credits each year as a practicing doctor after 20 years of clinical practice. And this should be for all of us as citizens. We need continuing citizen education. We even need credits. And to say that we have mastered a topic so that we can be decent citizens in the world. Maybe we should have a micro degree in cultural tolerance. Maybe in the United States, we should have a mini degree in Chinese history so we don't want to go to war with China, or understand many other topics that would help us to make peace better in the world. Let me stop there. These are just a few quick points, but to emphasize curating sustainable development, global classrooms, low cost or zero cost higher education, reaching the hard to reach, lifelong learning. It's the most exciting time in education that I've experienced in 42 years as a professor now. For the first 30 years, everything was basically the same. Stand up in front of a room, maybe with a blackboard behind you, and hope you didn't bore the students to death. But with the digital world, what we can do and should be doing is completely amazing. Let me express one hope, I hope not out of turn. Maybe Ireland could be the great champion of SDG 4. It's so much in the spirit of the country. It is so much in your leadership. It fits so much with Ireland's traditions and how Ireland kept civilization alive in some of its darkest moments. It reminds me, if I may say, that when President Kennedy spoke in the Irish Parliament in 1963, and he said, little countries can do great things, and none has done more than Ireland. And I think that is true. I want to subscribe to President Kennedy's wisdom on that. And maybe Ireland could help us to lead the success of SDG 4. Nothing could be more important for the Sustainable Development Goals. Thanks so much for letting me join, and back to you, and congratulations on this event.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. So no pressure on the SDG Academy team or on Ireland. We've got our homework, but give us. We'll try and get it done by 2030, but it might take a little longer.
Interesting, Paul. If I may say just one word on that. I had a very interesting discussion yesterday. Everybody acknowledges we're not going to finish this agenda by 2030. Next year, when we have the big midterm, I think we need to change the term from Agenda 2030 to Agenda 2050, not to slow us down, but to make clear that a whole generation is going to be committed to this. So this is really Agenda 2050. We should think in those terms in a positive way, and let's get it done. And then, yes, absolutely, I want to keep the pressure on. Thanks.
So I have till I'm 85. Okay, so the Minister of Education and Religious Affairs in Greece was supposed to come, but she didn't make it, but she did send a video. So Nikki Keramis is going to give us an address, and most of us know that she's been a really tough reformer of curriculum towards the SDGs in Greece, and has won many awards. So we'll play her address.
Ministers, Professor Sachs, ladies and gentlemen, it is truly unfortunate that I cannot be there with you in person today to discuss this most important issue of transforming education for sustainable development. Initially, I was not able to come because we are currently introducing a new bill in Parliament which aims at exactly this, namely the quality upgrade of universities in Greece and how to better connect them with society. On top of that, I was unfortunately diagnosed with COVID a few days ago, so all of this has rendered impossible my trip to Paris. The UN SDGs have set a roadmap for a better future aimed at tackling poverty, inequality, and environmental degradation. And while there is an SDG that is explicitly dedicated to education, I think that most of us would agree that citizen empowerment through education is critical in achieving most SDGs, not just one, since the dissemination of knowledge and high-quality information is a key catalyst for change. Now more than ever, we need to invest in education for sustainable development in a whole-of-society approach, acknowledging how seemingly distinct phenomena are in fact deeply intertwined. To that end, please allow me to share with you some key policy initiatives from Greece on 3 levels. The 3 levels are universities, schools, and vocational education and training. First, at the university level, as I mentioned earlier, we are currently introducing a new bill that is aimed at bringing closer the university system with society and society's needs. For example, we have provided for a full comprehensive legal framework to support innovation in universities, to create incubators, pre-incubators for startup and spin-off companies in order to foster innovation. Research-based innovation, which can be applied to solve real existing problems in society, and particularly environmental ones, is absolutely vital in advancing SDGs. Second, we are strengthening universities' lifelong learning centers. We're streamlining the governance structures. We are introducing a framework for micro-credential certification, among others. Why? Because we think that universities exist to disseminate knowledge and provide upskilling and reskilling opportunities for all. Lastly, we're introducing a legal requirement for all universities to develop sustainable development plans in order to integrate sustainability in education, research, and operational activities. Second level, primary and secondary education. We have revamped over 160 school curricula in order to place the acquisition of skills at the very heart of learning, along with integrating sustainability across disciplines. We also, during the pandemic, we invested very heavily in the digital transformation of education with the provision of digital equipment to students and schools in an unprecedented scale, zero-rated access to internet, extensive teacher training. Our open education resource platform, Lighttree, has all school books and other digital material freely available online as we are investing further in digital education. Third level, vocational education and training. We have radically reformed the way VET models are set by including social partners in the process of curriculum formation so that what students learn is also relevant to society's needs. To offer just one example, in order to support Greece's efforts for decarbonization, we have introduced courses for technicians for renewable energy sources. So we first go and detect the needs of society, both at a national level and at a regional level, and then we take that into account when deciding what specialties to offer and how to form the various curricula. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to education for sustainable development, we believe it is essential to start as early as possible and to aim as broadly as possible. We have to integrate sustainability across the board, from pre-K to universities and lifelong learning. This will ensure that our common efforts have an impact and that we will be able to meet the sustainable development goals. Thank you so much for including me in this most distinguished group. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your attention.
Again, thanks for that kind address. So we move into the speaker panel. So our next speaker is going to be Samira Benadallah, who's from the Mohammed VI Foundation for Environmental Protection. So she's a biologist for 20 years in the field of water environment, and I'll give her the floor.
Oui, bonjour.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Excusez-moi, est-ce que je pourrais intervenir en français? Mon anglais n'est pas assez bon pour faire mon intervention.
I don't think we have a French translator unless we... Okay. Go ahead, speak in French. Speak in French, yeah.
Merci, merci beaucoup. Permettez-moi tout d'abord bonjour à tous. Permettez-moi tout d'abord de vous remercier de nous avoir associés à cet événement.
Just one stop, please. Excuse, let me translate.
So she'll translate after every couple of sentences.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this event, and hello to everybody. Allez-y.
Ok, merci. Donc, permettez-moi tout d'abord de vous remercier de nous avoir associés à cet échange sur les avancées de l'éducation au développement durable. Une éducation en perpétuel mouvement, en évolution continue, mais qui est seule reconnue aujourd'hui comme un catalyseur clé pour atteindre les objectifs du développement durable. Et c'est précisément dans cette vision...
Oui. Madame, il faut que vous arrêtiez chaque... Sinon, j'y arrive pas. Thank you very much.
Je vais très vite. Je vais trop vite.
Il faut que vous arrêtiez après quelques phrases parce que j'ai un peu que...
D'accord. Ok, merci.
Thank you very much for inviting us again, and it's thank you very much for letting us speak on the topic of sustainable development. This is an area which, allez-y.
C'est précisément dans cette vision, cette démarche que depuis sa création il y a plus de 20 ans aujourd'hui, que notre institution, que je représente aujourd'hui, la Fondation Mohammed VI pour la protection de l'environnement, sous la présidence de son... Oui, allez-y.
It's precisely in this area that for 20 years our institution, the institution Mohammed VI, allez-y.
Sous la présidence de son Altesse Royale, la princesse Al-Hassana, donc il s'est engagé.
That the president of our association the
Son Altesse
princess
royale, la princesse
Son
Bella
Altesse
Hasna,
Bella Asma has been working in this area and supporting our
qui
work.
s'est engagée à faire progresser l'éducation au développement durable et s'est inscrite dès le départ dans le cadre du programme des Nations Unies pour 2030, avec comme principale mission, oui,
has committed to sustainable development within the framework of the Sustainable Development Agenda 2020.
avec comme principale mission fondamentale la sensibilisation et l'éducation au développement durable.
As a principal mission, awareness raising on sustainable development.
L'objectif de la Fondation est d'accompagner tous les apprenants dans une prise de conscience des enjeux environnementaux.
The success of our foundation is to accompany all the stakeholders, all the participants in awareness raising in fundamental understanding of sustainable development.
Passant par la connaissance des thèmes clés de l'environnement et du développement durable, comme les changements climatiques, la biodiversité ou encore la protection des écosystèmes.
Starting by the issues related to climate change and ecosystems and biospheres.
Et tout ceci pour assurer des comportements adéquats.
In order to ensure behaviors which are adequate.
Aujourd'hui, nous avons près de 20 programmes nationaux et internationaux qui ont été progressivement implémentés à l'échelle locale, puis nationale, puis internationale.
Today we have we have 20 programs which are at the local, national, and international level.
Les programmes, les opérations et les initiatives concernent tous les acteurs de la société. C'est ce qui font aujourd'hui une valeur ajoutée à la Fondation et elle est devenue un acteur majeur de la sensibilisation au Maroc.
The actors of these programs have become major stakeholders of these activities in Morocco.
En 2019, forte de ses acquis et désirant amplifier son action, la Fondation s'est enrichie avec l'inauguration d'un centre multicible entièrement dédié à la sensibilisation et à la formation au développement durable.
In 2019, in order to consolidate these gains, the center has put in place a center which has a multi-targeted approach.
Ce centre est aujourd'hui une vitrine pédagogique exemplaire en termes de construction durable. C'est un laboratoire à ciel ouvert.
It's a pedagogical center on sustainable development. It's an open-air laboratory on sustainable development.
C'est une plateforme physique et digitale de développement de compétences et de production d'outils pédagogiques. C'est aussi un hub pour l'Afrique.
It's a platform which is physical and digital, and it's also a model for Africa.
Il ne cesse de capitaliser, de consolider les acquis de la Fondation, mais aussi de renforcer et étendre son action environnementale à l'échelle nationale, régionale, voire internationale.
It aims to consolidate the work of the foundation in Morocco, but also to scale up its work at the national, international, and local level.
Ses cibles, c'est toute la société, mais en priorité, bien sûr, les jeunes. Pourquoi les jeunes? Car nous pensons que nous devons les outiller pour qu'ils puissent préparer les générations futures à penser et à agir pour le développement durable.
It targets all of society, of course, but in particular the youth. And the reason it targets youth is because they're fundamental for the future.
Nous devons les préparer et avec une pédagogie diversifiée et les mener à penser autrement pour agir autrement.
We are preparing them to think differently in order to act differently.
Nous avons 4 programmes qui sont importants et qui sont aujourd'hui implémentés. Nous avons comme par exemple 2 programmes emblématiques comme Éco-École et comme Jeunes Reporters. Éco-École, par exemple, pour des niveaux du préscolaire ou du primaire.
We have 4 programs, of which 2, for example, is on Auto-École, which is for young journalists.
Ce sont des programmes qui sont implémentés maintenant dans toutes les écoles marocaines. Plus de 2800 écoles sont aujourd'hui impliquées.
These are programs which are implemented in all Moroccan schools, and there's more than 2,800 programs which have been implemented.
Plus de 33 000 éducateurs sont aujourd'hui formés et engagés.
33,000 teachers have now been trained and are committed to the work.
Des outils pédagogiques variés sont mis à leur disposition, des plus classiques aux plus complexes, comme des plateformes collaboratives, des jeux interactifs, etc.
Pedagogical tools have been put at their disposition, from those that are the most straightforward to those that are the most complicated, such as collaborative platforms, etc.
Le programme Jeunes Reporters pour l'environnement est aussi un programme international où les collégiens et les lycéens produisent des enquêtes journalistiques, des photographies et des vidéos pour révéler un développement durable non acquis.
The program Young Journalists is also an international program in which middle school and high school students take photos and do reports on issues about the environment and showing the work that has to also continue to be done.
Toujours dans cette même stratégie de faire avancer les objectifs du développement durable, en 2019, un autre programme très important, Global Schools, a été introduit et expérimenté par le Maroc.
In the same light, the program Global Schools in 2019 was started by Morocco and was launched.
Et ceci à côté de deux pays, la Turquie et le Ghana.
This was done in two countries, one in Turkey and in Ghana.
Global Schools, c'est un programme du réseau de solutions pour le développement durable, SDSN. Et grâce à ce réseau, la Fondation, en partenariat avec une université, une grande école, a pu déployer ce programme mondial.
This school is part of a network, and the Fondation is working with universities and grandes écoles, higher education institutions, to deploy this internationally.
Ce projet pilote est composé de 8 phases. Il est toujours en cours, mais les premières phases sont très probantes.
There are 8 phases of this project, and the first phases are in action.
Nous avons pu mobiliser plus de 80 experts, professeurs, inspecteurs de l'éducation.
Up to 80 experts and professors have been mobilized.
Nous avons pu analyser, cartographier des cursus scolaires de 12 années du primaire.
We have done a mapping and analyzed from 12 years primary K-12 education.
Plus de 284 manuels de tous les niveaux scolaires ont été cartographiés.
And also manuals, 204 manuals have been mapped of school materials.
Des résultats très intéressants ont apparu puisque la quasi-totalité des manuels montre la présence des objectifs du développement durable.
This was a very interesting exercise, as the majority of the school manuals showed that there was sustainable development.
Des professeurs sont plus sensibilisés, plus impliqués, et des écoliers sont fortement sensibilisés au concept du développement durable.
Teachers and students are more aware of the concepts of sustainable development.
Aujourd'hui, le travail est toujours en cours avec la formation d'un comité national
with the establishment of a national committee
qui accompagne tous les groupes de travail pour la création de cours pilotes.
Which is working with the national partners for pilot projects.
Et rapidement, un dernier programme qui est important et qui montre un petit peu la vision intégrée qui, lui, cible les universitaires.
There is also another program which is very important and which targets universities.
Dans ce sens, la Fondation a développé un réseau des universités vertes et d'éducation des jeunes en Afrique.
In this regard, the foundation has developed a university network and a youth network on sustainable development.
En partenariat avec le programme des Nations Unies pour l'environnement.
With this network has been developed with the United Nations Organization for the Environment.
Aujourd'hui, dans ce cadre, le réseau des universités vertes et d'éducation aux jeunes en Afrique regroupe 22 universités de 8 pays africains.
In this framework, this network brings together 22 universities and 8 countries in the Africa region.
Merci. En conclusion, je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de défis encore à relever, mais le temps ne nous permet pas. Et merci encore pour la traduction. Et je suis encore désolée.
Okay, thank you very
Merci
much for
beaucoup.
the time. Thank you very much. And there are still many challenges that I would like to share with you, but unfortunately we don't have the time. Thank you.
And no, thank you very much, because
Merci
it's thank you very much. Really very important work being done by Mohammed VI Foundation. I'm going to ask all speakers now to really I'm going to cut you off after 4 minutes, if that's possible. And Sam will just do a very quick overview. Sam Loney, who's the Director of Global Schools that you've just heard about, and on the Secretariat of Vision 4.7 is just going to take a few minutes, and then we'll keep moving down the list. Right.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for putting together this event so quickly. It's extraordinary how you managed to bring these many people together in the space of time that we had. I'm Sam Loney from DSTSN, and I'm Director of Global Schools. Global Schools has a simple mission, and that is to bring sustainable development education to classrooms around the world. And I will mention why in a minute, but we do that through a policy program working directly with countries and with our wonderful partners, Mohammed VI Foundation in Morocco, as well as others, but also through our advocates program, which you will hear from my colleague Amanda shortly. And why education for sustainable development? Well, there is quite extraordinary evidence showing that education for sustainable development is great for society. I'm sure you have heard this quite a lot over the past couple of days, and there is quite a bit of evidence of this, that when you give children the skills, the competencies and the knowledge to shape their future in a sustainable way, well, that actually has a lot of very profound effects on their environment and on society, on people and planet as a whole. And this is very important for the future of development and for the future of humanity. But also, there is another reason why education for sustainable development is critical, and that is that it is actually good for educational outcomes itself. So not only is it good for society, but it's also good for education. And there is a lot of evidence on this, and something we don't talk about enough, which is that when you do ESD, or Education for Sustainable Development, you increase all the other learning outcomes. Children become more engaged, attendance goes up, teacher satisfaction goes up. There's actually evidence that shows that children score better on maths and science skills, but also they expand their learning across many different types of domains. And for us, that's also very critical, because what ministries of education care about above all is to improve the education outcomes. So now the question you might ask yourself is, if ESD is good for education and is also good for society, why are we not seeing more of it? And that's exactly what we intended to find out through our research work with our partners in Morocco, Turkey and Ghana, through a localized research process with local institutions led by Mohammed VI Foundation in partnership with Al Aqwan University. And there are 3 reasons for this. Number 1 is there is no set curriculum for sustainable development. When we say sustainable development curriculum, there are different meanings, and there isn't really a great architecture. The UNESCO learning objectives is a great start, but I think we need to get a lot more detailed than that. And that really can help set the framework for what we mean by sustainable development education, but also for us to be able to actually measure it. This is something that we intend to do at Global Schools. The second one is that teachers are not trained on this. This is a new concept largely, and there are bits and pieces of training work being done, but comprehensively, we're not seeing the teacher education at the national level that is required to scale this up and make it transformative. And thirdly, it's that the driver of teacher education and driver of educational change and reform transform is the curriculum itself. And what we need to see is either the updating of curriculum, which takes a very long time, or actually at the very least, the updating of the textbooks, which teachers can use to creatively teach this. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but a lot of this can be best achieved through policy work. And for that to happen, something like Mission 4.7 can bring, the idea is to bring together different stakeholders, from policymakers who are taking the lead on this, to private platforms that are really populating the content and gathering this content, but also from academics and practitioners who can come together and discuss best practices, but also think about a comprehensive approach in terms of scaling up ESD. To do that, policy is key, and that's what Global Schools hopes to achieve. And through this conversation, we hope that we will be able to build the partnerships to be able to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. I'll keep moving it along. So Tanis Giannakopoulos, who's the Chief Librarian in the United Nations headquarters, and he's done some wonderful creative things, which he'll tell you about, but he has a lovely open science conference every year that he brings stakeholders to, which means that we can continue the conversation today in that forum. But Tanis, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you to the ambassador. Thank you to the Minister of Ireland. Thank you very much for inviting the UN librarians to this forum. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you out.
So, thank you very much. So, greetings from New York. I just wanted to bring some perspectives here from the side of the preservation, the side of the conceptualization of who is actually managing this type of research that education needs, and students and researchers actually need in order to bring into purpose the actual scientific aims and goals. I want to apologize myself as well. I was also diagnosed with COVID yesterday, but I'm holding in there. So the first thing that I wanted to bring into this discussion is the fact that we usually call about the continuing citizen education. We're talking about lifelong learning. We know that access to information, access to knowledge, the research output that I would like to call knowledge, is extremely important so that we can all continue a major principle of science, which is the replicability of science, the ability to replicate scientific experiments, to replicate surveys, replicate research, to make sure that science is trustworthy and credible. When we ask people around the world for continuing education and for lifelong learning, we perhaps need to make sure that there is a universal knowledge commons that will be available for them to access the information that they need in order to progress into their educational path, whatever that path may be it in the pure sciences or the digital humanities and so on. Yet, I'd like to bring some studies that were discussed very widely in the last Open Science Conference in November 2021, where we were informed by researchers globally that at this very moment that we are asking the world to be climate conscious, there is less than 30% of climate change research that is available to the public, that is available to the researchers. If a citizen or a person that is interested in climate conscious behaviors and does not have an access to a library, to an academic library, perhaps to a public library, then they will not be able to access this type of information. So what we have been noticing in the world of sharing the research outputs, of sharing the research record, of sharing the scientific outputs, is that there is a continuous tendency from the openness that at some point we reached in the print, or may I call it analog universe, there is now a tendency in the digital realm that more paywalls are being raised and more content is being locked behind paywalls, and that content cannot be accessed. And that is valuable research content that is very useful by all and for all that have an interest in the SDGs. And I'm talking about all the SDGs have an interest in learning, have an interest in access to information, have an interest in access to knowledge. In that perspective, I think the digital realm, revolutionary as it is, at the same time is a little bit anarchic in how the knowledge is being held and kept and managed and preserved and offered back to the citizens. We had a great example of the open science practices, actually, in reality, with the advent of COVID, when the exchange of data and information across countries, even between China and the US, was actually unprecedented. And we all saw where that led. It led to vaccination. It led to the development of a vaccine. And I think this is probably one of the most recent and more valuable arguments that would guarantee why it is important that we continue on this path of open science practices. And again, I'm referring here, of course, also to the recommendation of open science that UNESCO put forward in November 2021, and over 193 UNESCO member states ratified. Into that perspective, I wanted to bring the point of a universal knowledge commons, whether that is a commons for specific sciences or a commons for the sciences as all, which I think is something that we would need to create, cherish, and perhaps work in more innovative ways to support. Libraries can manage and accelerate this universal knowledge commons for the SDGs, so that students and researchers around the world continue to have access to knowledge, even when they are not close to a library. We do not have, I think, to reinvent the wheel. Perhaps we need to realign, reskill, and upgrade the infrastructure, but libraries as managers of repositories, which are actually the institutional outputs of a research organization, academic organization, schools networks, and so on, can push forward this agenda, both of open science, but also of access to information for education, and of course, for other practices in the open science world. The open science recommendation of UNESCO actually clearly stipulates that we need to open the barriers to a set of interrelated scientific research processes. And libraries are natural information and data brokers and curators in the open science in those processes. And I think that their role can be quite essential. In that realm, I think we also need to note that the licensing of content that becomes available online uses modalities that relate more to the print world rather to the digital world. I'm delighted to see a representative from the Creative Commons today who will elaborate on the wonderful work that is being done on new licensing models for digital content. From our perspective at the United Nations, the Hammarskjöld Library, which is the headquarters library of the United Nations, the UN libraries across the globe have come together to create the UN Knowledge Commons, and that is actually the UN Digital Knowledge Commons. What we did around that is we brought, and we continue to do so. This is a dynamic project which continues and will continue. We are bringing together content that is produced by UN entities around the globe, and we offer that freely online through the United Nations Digital Library, which has become a standard reference source for everyone in the world that wants to access policy content and United Nations related content and so on. The idea.
Tanis, can I ask you to conclude it, because I'm very conscious of time?
Yes, of course. I just wanted to show that this is sort of like how the way we are progressing on that idea of a universal knowledge commons from the United Nations perspective. And I think this is probably the main points I'd like to bring to this table. Thank you very much once again, Paul.
Yeah. No, excellent contribution. So I'll keep moving on. Zenep Vargalu, who's the program specialist and coordinator of the Open Education Repository Dynamic Coalition in UNESCO, and I'll give her the floor.
Thank you very much. This is quite exciting to do it in hybrid at the same time. Just to let you know, those that are watching from outside, the thing behind me looks different in real life. It's not even the same colors. It looks better on the screen, I think. I would like to just take up on particularly the points raised by Professor Sachs and of course Tanos, my colleague Tanos from the Dag Hammarskjöld UN Library in particular. Dr. Sachs spoke about the needs. He spoke of the needing curation of educational materials for sustainable development, use of digital at low cost, digital for hard to reach, and the change of skills and lifelong learning materials, the need for agility in learning and agility in information and knowledge. And I'm going to speak to you today about the UNESCO Open Educational Resources recommendation, which responds to each of these points and also responds to the point of Tanos just a couple of seconds ago about the need for universal knowledge commons. So if you bear with me, I'm going to give you background on the recommendation and then explain to you how this all fits together as I speak, I hope. So first of all, the UNESCO OER recommendation was adopted in 2019, just before the pandemic. We had no idea what was coming, but it was adopted at that moment, and it was about sharing knowledge openly and freely and legally. And it was the first and remains the first UN normative instrument in openly licensed content. In it, there is a definition which underscores that OER are learning, teaching, and research materials that are available in the public domain or on an open license that allows no cost access, reuse, repurposing, adaptation, and redistribution by others, and a definition of open licensing. And this is really, 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 really important. If there's nothing else that's maintained in this discussion, it's the issue of open licensing and sharing. And I think Cable is on the screen there, and he will provide you with more information on open licensing. But this is the key for us to share information and to build information and to create information and to work together. Now, this material, this recommendation has 5 areas of action, and the added value here is that 193 governments on this planet, we have only about 200 governments on the planet. So basically the entire planet, the governments of the entire planet agreed by consensus to work in 5 areas of action in order to be able to mainstream open educational resources and in effect, make open the default. These 5 areas are capacity building. The second is policy. The third one is ensuring that they're accessible and inclusive and multilingual and quality. I know that's more than one word, but you get the idea. Sustainability, and sustainability, I will just qualify here. In the document, they're talking about sustainability in the materials. So the crux of the matter is that teachers and learners don't shoulder the costs of the materials, that there is a business model that allows for it to continue without being carried by the users or by the principal beneficiaries. And the 5th one is international collaboration. And it's about bringing everyone together, making sure that the different sectors, the different parties and the stakeholders in this group actually work together. And in this regard, the stakeholders, who are they? It's not your usual educational family, if you like. We have, of course, education industry, ministries, institutions, professors, associations of teachers and students, etc. But there are also cultural associations. So there's libraries, and we're very, very happy with it because libraries are extremely important. They are probably the blood that keeps knowledge flowing. And after everything is done and finished, there's still libraries. There were libraries before and there will be libraries after. They might not look the same, but they are still there because they are the temples of knowledge. I'm sorry, that sounds a little religious, but it's true. And I think the work that's being done by the UN Library and also the work of Tanos and calling for universal knowledge commons in this area is vital. because we have to maintain knowledge, build knowledge, create it, share it, curate it, as also underscored by Dr. Sachs. And I think this recommendation provides with the means. There is the science recommendation that talks about science, but this recommendation talks about educational resources and what their role is. Now, there is another thing that we should probably underscore. Recently, very recently, there is the UN Secretary General Digital Roadmap. There's this meeting here today. Action Track 4, which is under which we fall today, is about digital cooperation. And it's very important, and our discussions here are actually one of 4 side sessions on open educational resources and open sharing of knowledge. So we would have to imagine that this is a really key point that has to be developed. And sustainable development is really about our survival. And therefore, the discussion we're having now, I hope that you will be able to use the open educational resources recommendation as a tool to move forward and as fuel for these important discussions, because it is here to support all the 4 issues that were highlighted by Dr. Sachs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Zainab. So I could listen to you much longer, but unfortunately we wanted to keep it. That's excellent. And on that note, the blood that supports the system, we've got 2 librarians coming up. So Niamh Brennan first. So Niamh is a program manager for research informatics in Trinity College Dublin, and I'll let her take the floor. And when we were in Science Europe, we coined this phrase diamond access and diamond partnership. So she might explain that, which is a response to Tanis. It's the opposite to what Tanis was describing. Go ahead, Niamh.
Thanks very much, Paul. And can I share my screen? Now you're muted, Paul.
Go ahead, try. Are you able to share? Or do you want to put the slides, Sam?
Thank you. If you go to share screen.
That one's the blue one, Open it.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, and go back in.
Sorry, Paul, I'm sharing my screen.
No, we're going to share from here, Niamh. So if you could just hold off on that. Go ahead, Sam.
I think she's already shared it. Okay.
I've just stopped sharing it. Sorry, thanks. I didn't realize.
Okay, go on, Niamh. Okay, Niamh, you do it again.
Will I share my screen again?
Yeah, this is like a phone call that people keep ringing each other until, but you work away.
Okay.
Yeah, we have it.
Okay, grand. Okay, thanks so much for inviting me, Paul, and to this illustrious panel and this exciting discussion. I'm going to speak very quickly in the next 5 minutes about getting a fair deal for open education resources, picking up very much on what Zainab has been talking about, and looking at the kind of nitty-gritty of what it means about what Professor Sachs said about SDG 4 might be the most important SDG, which you certainly wouldn't think it from the point of kind of support that we're getting for open education resources. There's a lot of enthusiasm about it, but when we think about the goals, and that's what I want us to do today, is remember what we're trying to do here. We're trying to look at sharing educational resources in order that they can be repurposed, reused, localized, and made relevant in local communities. So it's all very well to make our resources available up there on the web. Tanis used the word anarchic, and I was going to just say it's a little bit like the Wild West there. So we're going to make some really practical suggestions in this area. First, foster open science view, just showing open education resources within their broader context within open science. But we tend to see far greater attention paid to open access to publications, to research data now. Why? Maybe because education tends to be the poor relation. That's what I'm hearing from a lot of our lecturers and academic staff, that doesn't get the same importance attributed to it as research. Let's see how we can readjust the balance. When I look at open education resources, they remind me of research in that they are research data. They're digital, they're multifaceted and varied, they're grey in the library sense in that they're not traditionally published. They're very valuable, and yet they're unstandardized in the way they're described. They lack metadata, identifiers. They're very difficult to locate and access. They're not easily intelligible by machines, which is what we really need to happen. They're often made up of different types of media. They often have multiple copyright requirements associated with them. They're typically not tracked or indexed in the same ways as, let's say, journal articles in research. They're not cited, so the academics don't get the benefit of the recognition for making them available, and they don't get any rewards for that. So that makes it hard for us to encourage people to do more of this and to do it right. OER have the 5 R's, that supporting reuse, but without the structure associated with them that we see with research data. Just to illustrate, research data has Go Fair, the organization and movement, the data management plans online, standardized research data management like the Science Europe template, data citation indices, resources like Impact Story for tracking the impact, inclusion in open citations and open science metrics, etc. So this is why I'm suggesting that we should make open education resources fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, not just as a lofty statement, but as applying specific principles. The FAIR principles to data were there so that research data could be organized so that it could be easily accessed, understood, exchanged, and reused. And I suggest that we need the exact same requirements, even more so if possible, to open education resources. The access to the research outputs to research data are acknowledged and indeed mandated by the European Commission and various other funders. They promote it in order to support the impact of their and the integrity of their investment in this work. I feel that educational resources should be valued at least as much as this. Open education resources are created with sharing in mind, but sharing is not supported as well as for research. The expected open repository standards, metadata, identifiers, licenses, I'm looking forward to Cable's presentation in a few minutes, to support interoperability, harvesting, repurposing, and reuse are not generally available in the same way or if they are available, they're not applied to open education resources. That makes it so much more difficult for, let's say, a town planner in a town in Bangladesh who wants to take one of the SDG MOOCs, Academy MOOCs, and repurpose it and localize it for relevance in his or her local community. It's going to make it really difficult and expensive for them to do that, to achieve that. I believe that OER should be created with reuse and longevity in mind, managed similarly to research data, because doing that is going to facilitate knowledge discovery and improve access and transparency. So it's time for a fair deal for open education. I'm just going to go ahead quickly to look at what the FAIR principles mean. Findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable simply mean providing rich metadata and a persistent identifier to the resources, to putting them in trusted repositories, whatever suits them, free repositories, using interoperable language that supports machine learning, and having the clear licenses that Cable is going to tell us about, supporting reuse, that I won't go into. So I'm just going to end with this, to remember the goals, why we're doing this, to be fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, apply the UNESCO principles of care, and also because FAIR is the practical foundation supporting reuse in open education. It needs complementary, practical, human and organizational supports, the brainware that Professor Sachs was talking about. So we need metrics, next generation metrics, recognizing and supporting this activity, skills and training for our educators, and incentive and rewards for them. I call this Minister, and I'm calling on institutions, funders and agencies to support FAIR for education and to minister to your educators. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Niamh. So that's a lot to take in, but we'll send you on documents, anyone who wants to dive into that further, because it's actually so important. Because we all say in track 4 that we want education resources as a global public good, but you know, you have to incentivize to get them up on a repository. They have to be findable. People have to use them, etc. You've got to put in the right legal and other types of frameworks, etc. So this fair deal and minister the resource properly is actually extremely important. Thank you, Niamh. So moving on to Claire. Claire Maguire is Policy and Research Office in the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. And I'm going to hand the floor, just in the interest of time. That's right.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And it's lovely to be here from IFLA. We're the global voice of the library profession. I won't belabor the point, but the concept of openness, of equitable access to knowledge is really at the heart of the mission of libraries. And thank you to Zeynep for those words about libraries in your presentation. And this is also one of IFLA's core values, that the belief that people and communities and organizations need universal and equitable access to information for their social, educational, cultural, democratic, and economic well-being. And in this, there's a strong connection between access to information and the pillars of sustainability. And we can then view open education resources as a vector of social justice, a democratization of knowledge, and an opportunity to transform old paradigms of who benefits from and who creates knowledge towards a knowledge society in which all are members. And to achieve this, we need transformative action. We need to utilize and optimize our networks. And the societal benefit of OER and their impact on achieving SDG 4 is upheld by UNESCO's 2019 recommendation. But further, as was noted, the recommendation really reflects the multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral nature of the stakeholders that should be involved. And this work is being done, but transformation that can counter the trend towards privatization of information will require stronger partnerships in the creation of open knowledge systems. So systems that are both the organizational structures and processes that bring together open content creators with infrastructure and with users. And as has been noted, libraries are and continue to be key actors in open knowledge systems, in the creation, the curation and promotion of these materials. And this process of curation is essential if we want to develop collections of work that really add value to educators and learners. And the creation of open material isn't enough. We would risk it perhaps going undiscovered. We need this content to be discoverable, and that's something that libraries are well placed to do. But beyond discoverability, curation of these resources also offers opportunities to bring resources together that build an understanding of and aid education for sustainable development. For example, many libraries are building repositories of material that helps educators address topics like climate change, health, anti-racism, and media and information literacy. I came across an example at Penn State University. The university libraries run a repository of open and affordable materials, which this initiative was started by faculty members who are pioneers of open courseware, but it has been since been taken on by the libraries, and it offers a range of course material that are free to download, remix, translate, localize, and adapt, that focus largely on climate change and environmental sustainability amongst a range of other topics. And one point I want to stress is that to achieve target 4.7, we need to reach outside the walls of our institutions and reach people where they are. And one unique trait of libraries that perhaps hasn't been touched on is their position within communities. And public libraries have a role to play in connecting learning material with people of all ages in support of sustainable development. And this could be material that public library professionals reuse or create to conduct sustainability programs. It could be educational material on public health. For example, the African Health OER Network, which seeks to advance health education in Africa through the promotion of material that is made by African academics to address local curriculum gaps. OER Africa has an ongoing partnership with AFLIA, the African Library and Information Associations and Institutions, and they are carrying out a project to help librarians in Africa reimagine their libraries as community spaces for open access to information through awareness raising and training on open licensing and open knowledge with around 50 librarians across Africa. And to this, I would come back to that point of enabling the localization and the diversification of knowledge. UNESCO's Futures of Education report stresses we must promote increased diversity in knowledge, linguistic diversity, diverse worldviews, diverse ways of knowing that have been left out of the knowledge commons. And to keep the lens on target 4.7, education for sustainable development must be be able to be localized to be effective. Not all OER is universally relevant, and we must empower educators to participate in creating knowledge that draws on local culture and local knowledge. Libraries within our schools, our universities, and our communities are well placed to assist. So perhaps I will close with just a few recommendations moving forward. Again, not forgetting that concept of curation, often offered by library and information professionals to diversify material, but also to ensure the material remains discoverable and usable. And with curation comes moderation, and that must be baked into our knowledge system. And again, library professionals are often already taking on these roles. But to achieve these partnerships and these collaborative networks, we need to consider governance. And in this, we need to ensure that policy and decision makers have the will to assign resources and hire staff to support such programs or support the ongoing professional training we need. And the 2009 recommendation provides a framework in this regard, but its implementation will take advocacy, again, something that together we are best placed to approach. So I would close with recommending that we don't lose sight of the transformational power of working between educators, teachers, professionals, and library staff within our schools and universities, but also within our communities. And building these open knowledge communities, we need a variety of input and of expertise and a need to adapt to local context. And this can be achieved through our collaboration and through our co-creation. So I'll stop there, but thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Claire. That's excellent. So the outreach of libraries is, into communities and right throughout the world, Africa, etc. So it's a huge point. So I'll keep moving on. So Jazri Hwayat is the Chief Education Outreach. She's Chief of the Education Outreach section of the United Nations Academic Impact, and that's a network of universities who are interested in implementing their SDGs in their everyday lives.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Oh, good morning and good afternoon, good evening. Thanks, Paul, for the introduction and for inviting me to participate in this. We're here today talking about transforming education because obviously, as Professor Sachs mentioned, one of the most critical drivers of sustainable development is education, and SDG number 4. And obviously it has the power to lift individuals out of poverty, entire economies and countries as well. I think one of the insights that we have here at headquarters in New York is that the SDG Agenda 2030 is really an extraordinary articulation of a blueprint for transformation more largely. So my role, as Paul was saying, is to oversee an incredible network of higher education institutes. It's called the United Nations Academic Impact. We have 1,600 members of universities from around the world, over 150 countries. We've been around for over 10 years now, and we work with institutions all around the world in higher learning to align with the United Nations values, principles, and especially with the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it's really imperative that we recognize the value of networks of knowledge sharing. And a key strategic way that we work with all of these member institutions is to convene them. And our idea really is to workshop around the SDGs and to work together to share what is working well in the university institutions and in higher education to promote sustainable development. And what I can tell you, I'm not sure if Professor Sachs is still on the line, is that it's incredibly exciting. We see the possibilities happening. I'm sitting right now in Utah. We're organizing the first academic conference on the SDGs, and we're seeing new schools that are being developed, new PhD programs, new master's programs, new courses being developed. We're seeing vice chancellors and presidents of universities embedding the Sustainable Development Goals into their strategic engagement for their institutions. So I think this network of knowledge sharing in higher education can be a really significant vehicle for promoting the SDGs and digital learning. And so this question that we're posing to the institutions about what is the role of higher education in promoting digital learning and in the SDGs more broadly. And I think, you know, some of the answers we have to that are just very simple. Look at what Professor Sachs has been able to do as we have worked with him in the United Nations to create this common language around the SDGs. And I want to just say very quickly, because I'm really aware of time, that I think when we see, you know, the Ambassador of Ireland, who I know had to leave, we are working together with you already, Paul, on the SDSN. We want to work together. We want to utilize this massive network so that we can create this open source curriculum together, because what's happening out there in the world is huge. We just need to actually curate it and make it accessible. So just saying that we want to work very, very closely with you to achieve that goal. And the other thing that Professor Sachs touched on was how critical financing is and how important these massive online classroom experiences are. So I just want to recommend that, why doesn't Ireland, SDSN, the United Nations Academic Impact, and UNESCO, why don't we do a massive online classroom for all of the ministers of education about this necessity around financing and open source learning? So I just want to leave that as my final thought, as a way forward out of this important conversation that you have convened. Thank you so much.
Right, so consider that done. Another easy home, but I think it's actually quite doable, and edX, they're going to help us with it. So I think it's consider it done, get the ministers of education in. So thank you for that. So I'm very conscious of time and I really have to apologize. So I might try and cut people down as short as we can. So I'll just, so Trina, so another, and we're going to include the IAU obviously in that network, as we do. So Trina Jensen is from IAU, and she's the manager of higher education and digital transformation. So that's the International Association of Universities.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for this opportunity. And I definitely agree with the words just before that it's very important to bring together universities around the world, and that is actually the core mission of the International Association of Universities. Let me just introduce very quickly the association. We were actually created by UNESCO, and we are housed here since our beginning in 1950. So for more than 70 years, we've been working on bringing together universities across the world to collaborate on different issues and topics that are pertinent for higher education. So we very much subscribe to that, of course. I work on the area of digital transformation within this association, but we do have different priorities. We work on sustainable development more specifically, and Isabel Tuman, my colleague working on that, is in the room in case you're interested in learning more about the specific activities in that field. In terms of digital transformation, which is kind of partly the topic of this session here, we've been working at the association on developing a new policy statement. And we are very pleased that we will finally be able to submit it now to the upcoming General Conference taking place actually in Dublin in Ireland this year in October. And this policy statement we have entitled Transforming Higher Education in a Digital World for the Global Common Good. And I think that it's important just to extract a few of the principles that we have in this statement and that brings together the universities around the world. And let me also say that, of course, this statement was developed bringing together an expert group with people coming from all regions of the world. It has been shared with our full membership. We have shared it with the student representatives in order to get as many voices in there while formulating what are the key principles and values that we believe are important as part of the digital transformation of higher education. So one thing I think that is important to highlight is that we see digital technologies as a tool it's not the solution in itself, it's how we decide to make use of the tools that is important. So we do call for a humanistic, ethical, inclusive, and purpose-based digital transformation. We really believe that it is up to the humans to set the agenda in terms of how we want to explore digital transformation, also in terms of higher education. Now, this being said, I think that it's important to continue to innovate. And I think that we also heard in the opening yesterday, the UN Secretary General was saying that learning resources are a public good. We heard the UNESCO Director General saying that education is a public good. And I think that's extremely important. Part of our statement as well is kind of linking the work of UNESCO to the work of the universities, because in our policy statement, we are actually reaffirming commitment to the UNESCO 2019 recommendation on OERs that Zainab just explained. We also reaffirmed the importance of the UNESCO recommendation of open science that Thanos was referring to as well. Really important normative instruments where we have member states committed. And what we do at the IAU is to bring together universities to discuss the topic. What does it mean for the universities and where do we stand? Actually, as part of the launch of the open science recommendation last year, IAU did a specific in focus on open science in higher education. And we brought together researchers, experts, universities from all regions of the world to discuss what are at stake for universities, how are we transforming. And I just want to extrapolate a few examples of the voices that came out of this magazine. And one was that it's really important to be able to not only access knowledge, but also to be able to partake and contribute to the production of knowledge. And I think here I want to make a reference to what Thanos was saying as well, that some of the issues are related to paywalls and being able to afford publishing your contributions. And here I also want to remind that within the recommendation on open science, it says that paywall methods of publication where to allow for immediate publication is not aligned with the principles of open science. So open science is actually really truly open access information. So I think that's very important. So that is one of the important ideas of this session, of course. We also heard from many of the universities that it's a complex process to change. It takes time to change. There are a certain number of traditions and cultures that are at stake. It takes multi-stakeholder collaboration, as you were referring to as well, Claire, that we need to bring together the different stakeholders at the table to find solutions as to how to move forward. It needs to have, I mean, for the universities where we see that they are the most advanced, it's because there is supportive policies within the institutions, but also at the national level. So those are examples of the voices of the universities. And I think that, as was said by our previous speaker, what we do at IAU is really to facilitate the communication among universities in order to share knowledge, best practices. We try to set ambitions for the directions where we are going and that we have universities on board from all regions of the world. And then we also conduct global surveys in order to monitor the progress. So I think that will be it for me, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So between SDSN and UN Academic Impact in AIU, I think we probably have about 8,000 universities. So we'll have something to talk about with the ministers. I mean, okay, so Radhika Iyengar, so she's in the Center for Sustainable Development in the Earth Institute, Columbia University, and she is she's actually the chair of Mission 4.7, and she does excellent work in schools in India and in the New York area. But can I ask, just in the interest of our guests here as well, that maybe we'll cut it to as short as we can, maybe 3 minutes. Is that all right? The hosts.
Sure, very short, Paul.
Yeah.
Just very key main points. One is I feel that thank you for organizing this event. I feel that this panel here, including the ambassador's voice, including what the Minister of Ireland just mentioned, I think needs to really reach the world, including the youth. I think they have created this whole movement on policy and practice that needs to go global. And I really welcome the minister, the ambassadors, all other ministers here to maybe join our Mission 4.7, talk to our youth members. We are meeting live every Friday to discuss key issues, and I think they will be the right audience to discuss policy of education. It needs to also be grounds up. So we need to have a lot of voices from the ground, taking the youth consent as well. One thing I beg to disagree with Professor Sachs, who also happens to be my boss, is that I don't think we need to wait for 2050. The need is now. 2030 is already a long time for us to work on, and I, over the years, have realized the slow pace at which the education sector works in. We need to really get our act together now. We do not have the time to wait for 2030, neither do we have time to wait till 2050. So I would really urge this consortium to have a plan, have a concrete plan on how we are going to make this possible, not just for institutions, but directly reach the youth who are observing things around them, who are seeing what the environmental sustainable development challenges are locally, and can we have skills and knowledge related courses that can help them to get those skills needed now, so that they can work with their local governments, local councils to come up with those plans. I've seen here, we at the Center for Sustainable Development, we have a program called the Eco Ambassadors, and we've been observing their needs in terms of their eagerness on creating plans, local plans on global carbon emissions. And are we going to wait till 2030 or 2050 to tell them, sorry, we can't do anything right now, come back to us in 2030? No, we need to be really doing the work that we need to be doing now. And for that, we have Mission 4.7, which will take the Transformation Education Summit ideas and really reach the masses, really reach all the students who are looking for the content that they need to focus on localization of these larger global goals. We are working at the policy level, advising various different ministers of education, state ministers of education, and then we are also working at the practice level, where we are developing and curating content that have the systems thinking approach, so that we are solving integrated problems, because life in general have integrated problems, and we need to be creating those courses that address those issues holistically. We are working with teacher training institutions. We are working with, again, content providers who are coming up with various different content. I think we need to have the scale to reach the students directly. It was earlier before COVID, we saw that the schools were the only place where students got a lot of the information. But now after COVID, there's a lot of discussion, a lot of non-linear ways of learning where students are going online and directly accessing the information that they need to access these local issues. So I would suggest to definitely look at our website. I'll share the link on the chat, and let's reconnect. Let's not just this be like a one panel amazing event. It has to really percolate with us coming together and creating a plan. And Paul, I think you're the best person to get this together. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words. So that's Mission 4.7. So definitely have a look at it, mission4.7.org, and get involved. So that's the call there. So moving on to Laura Kernetspis, I think I'm pronouncing that very badly, who's was the first director of the Centre for Innovation and Teaching and Learning at the University of Cape Town. Again, I apologize for this, but if you could keep it to 3 minutes, that would be really great.
That's absolutely fine. I did give you a slide, but you can ignore it, Paul, because having listened to everything that
you work away, it's coming up. Yeah.
No, but I'm changing exactly what I'm saying. You can leave it there, but that's going to be the end of what I'm saying rather than the beginning. So basically, just listening to everyone, the Sustainable Development Goals are more essential than ever. And I hear that SDGs are a blueprint for transformation. But the thing that I really hear listening to everyone is how education has become part of a post-digital society. And by that, I mean, not that there isn't a digital divide, there is, but the fact that it's impossible to live in society in the world today without being part of digital systems. And with cell phones having become so widespread, everyone is a data point. You might not be a data user, but you're a data producer, and you certainly have a data trace. And it's been interesting to me listening to everyone today that the pandemic has hardly been mentioned. And yet the pandemic has changed education fundamentally. And it's changed it in two ways. The first way has had more attention given to it. So the first change has obviously been the shift online and the implications for pedagogy and for teaching, for learning, and these have been mentioned already quite rightly. But the other change that we saw at the same time has been the flood of private companies entering education. And there's a huge confluence that has happened with privatization and digitization. And what it's all added up to is the datafication of education. And this has got a huge amount of implications for equity. So the reason I think this is a particular concern is, first of all, because there's been massive edtech investment, the number of unicorns, the amount of venture capital that's gone into education. The Global South is now considered to be new markets. But not only that, the big tech companies, the ones that are known as mamata, in other words, Meta, Alphabet, Microsoft, Apple, Twitter, and Amazon, are now providing free tools, so-called free tools, to less affluent countries and institutions. But of course, they're not free. The price is personal data, and with companies like Facebook and Google, obviously that data is going into a much more complex ecosystem. And it's the affluent who can afford to opt out. And you might ask, why am I talking about all this when we're talking about open education? Because what we're seeing is that surveillance capitalism has infiltrated education, and there's more need for open education than ever before. But what I would like to plead for is that we see open education as being beyond licenses, beyond resources, and we see open education as a new kinds of business models. So someone spoke earlier about knowledge commons. What I'm really concerned about is that the proprietary company publishers, for example, have appropriated the open education model. So someone was talking about publishing paywalls. What we're actually seeing is access paywalls. We're seeing publishing paywalls. So now what's happened is that if you can't pay the article processing charge, you can't publish. And so we've just got this complete cut out exclusion of half the world's knowledge, all the research from the Global South, etc. And it's really worrying me that the open education agenda and open access agenda is being appropriated in this way. So that slide that I was going to talk to for 3 minutes, and I'm not because I'm sure I'm out of time, is really an answer to what can be done. And listening today has really underlined for me the urgency of doing more about these very, very serious concerns. I'm happy for the slide to be shared because there isn't really time, but it's really about a group and individual formal and informal strategies, many of which we've heard about today. So I'm going to stop there.
Yeah. Thanks, Emil. That was excellent, and we'll share that slide so we got it. And that was an excellent intervention. So I'm being a bad chair. We've only 15 minutes left, so I've decided to do. Hopefully, I don't catch Gable out, but I'm going to jump to, let's say, the hosts or I'm going to jump over some of the hosts and jump to Gable Green, and he's the Director of Open Knowledge Creative Commons, and maybe 3 minutes, Gable, just to, you've been quoted quite a bit today, but you can give us your Twitter sell on this.
Thank you, Paul. I will keep it under 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Thanos discussed the importance of a universal knowledge commons, and while there are many challenges that have been discussed, I'll focus my comments on one critical path component. As we build these robust, free, open, public digital learning content and platforms, we need to ensure many things. I'll focus on 2. One, publicly funded educational resources and research needs to be openly licensed by default. The public should have unfettered legal and technical access to the knowledge that the public pays for. UNESCO has supported this position for over a decade now. Second, as we build and share these open public digital learning content, or OER, the legal details really matter. If we don't get the details right, it doesn't work. For learning outcomes to be improved at scale, including the most marginalized, this public content must be freely available, openly licensed, curriculum aligned, available in multiple language, adaptable, and contextually relevant. For an educational resource to be an OER, it must be available not only at no cost, but also openly licensed or dedicated to the public domain so that others may legally reuse, adapt, and share the OER. The legal rights to adapt is critical for regional and local uses, translations, and iterative innovation as we work together. Creative Commons, as an example, recently partnered with the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network's SDG Academy to openly license their amazing educational resources. They move their digital content from free to open so that others can use it, make modifications, improvements, etc. The world has used Creative Commons international open licenses for 20 years now to make open educational resources open. Creative Commons is a global nonprofit that stewards these open licenses to make it easy and legal for the world to share educational resources, scientific research, cultural works, and more. The CC licenses are free to use. They always have been, and we've dedicated them to the public domain to ensure that they're always free to use and that they'll always be there. As Laura said, open licensing is not by itself a meaningful proxy for openness in education. We're all trying to work toward improved access, better quality, greater student success, empowering open pedagogies, local knowledge and voices, etc. Open licensing educational resources is not the end goal, but it is a necessary condition for public open educational resources. Creative Commons stands ready to support your organizations, your governments, and their educational institutions as we collectively move forward in this work. Feel free to contact me anytime. We're always happy to help. I'll bring the right resources to the challenge. And I'll also be in the summit in September in New York, and we'll be happy to participate in any conversations there as well. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, that's really, really excellent. And, you know, the libraries are an enabler, but I can tell you that Creative Commons licenses and the things that you're doing are just so vital to this this kind of idea. So we're more than appreciative to you. And I will set the group around some of the details of those that you shared with me actually on the Creative Commons license and the different things you can do with remixing and other things. So I'm going to jump to Caroline Mole, who's Director of Partnerships at edX. And 3 to 4 minutes would be great.
I'll go quick, Paul. Thank you for being here, and pleasure to meet you all and be part of this fantastic conversation. So for those of you who don't know edX, the organization that I represent, edX is an online learning platform that was founded in 2012 by Harvard and MIT. And it was one of those first MOOC, massive open online courses platforms. Over time, we host courses from individual courses, from micro credentials, for like micro bachelors, micro masters, and then boot camps, executive education, and full degrees. We were founded really with a mission to enhance access to quality education for everyone, everywhere. And so what that means is not only building a platform and having partners hosting their content on our platform, but also building a platform that is meeting accessibility criteria. For those who are visually or auditively impaired, they can still learn on our platform. We built a consortium of partners over time, and we're very pleased and excited that SDG Academy is part of that. So we have around 60 courses in all the sustainability related content areas, over 300,000 learners globally, wildly successful. And so that's an example of a partnership, but other examples of partnerships are with the World Bank, universities like Cambridge University, Oxford University, really a network of a global consortium. Our platform is open source, and that was part of the mission. And it means that everyone can set up their own open edX instance. That means that governments have been taking the lead in building their own platform and hosting content for their own citizens to support nationwide learning. Other initiatives that we see is that governments fund nationwide learning, and we've seen as well initiatives that governments take to educate the teachers by using our courses, because not all the teachers have the qualifications to teach, in particular the newly developed digital skills. And so we've been supporting those type of initiatives as well. One of the things that I think is relevant for this audience specifically is when we started with individual courses and grew over time, we saw a huge demand in the areas that you would expect, like business, leadership, management, data science, computer science. And over the last couple of years, thank goodness, there is a steep increase in interest on our platform by our learners. We're talking about 45 million learners globally, looking for sustainability related content. So there's like a 30% growth of learners that look specifically for climate change, sustainability, SDG, etc. In addition to that, we've seen, other than great partners like the SDG Academy, academic institutions taking the lead in start teaching content in renewable energy, in food waste management, and all sorts of other mitigation strategies to help moving this further forward. And then lastly, we see a steep inclination in job skills, which is how we sort of match content and inform our partners to build courses that match the needs of the market. So let me pause here. Was that 3 minutes?
Keep going. So that was brilliant. So again, when you have open education resources, that can be reused and people can be incentivized to use them to get micromasters, microbachelors, professional certs, etc. So, but you have to have, as Gabe was, the necessary condition is to have those resources in there for people to use. Okay. Nicole Allen is Director of Open Education at Spark USA. So I give the floor to you, Nicole. Sorry for the rush.
Wonderful, thank you. So I work for Spark, which is a NGO working with libraries and policymakers to make our systems for sharing knowledge and research and education open by default and equitable by design. There have been so many great points during this conversation. I think the main thing I want to underscore is that as we work to build more innovative digital systems, we should be making sure that they don't replicate the barriers of the past, many of which are steeped in legacies of injustice, racism, colonialism, other forms of discrimination, and even open systems can be inequitable. And we really need to be intentional throughout our policies, practices, and leadership to put equity into the foundations. And I think this is evident in the area of research publishing and some of the conversations around the future there. Paywalls are, of course, an example of the analog legacy imposing itself on the digital world. And, we believe that research, and especially government-funded research, should be accessible to the public. And paywalls just create a dynamic where there haves and have-nots. But as I think Laura noted, This goes beyond just outputs of knowledge. It's also about participation and shaping it. Countries are developing open science policies and open educational resource policies. We need to consider how to build these systems in a way that are open on all sides of the knowledge life cycle. I also just want to pick briefly back up on the thread of surveillance capital. And I don't believe the issue of artificial intelligence has come up in this conversation, but I do know that it's going to have a role in education and digital innovation in at least some countries. Mine, the United States, is one of them. And, these tools can provide adaptive, personalized learning opportunities. And in some cases, this can provide great benefits in cases where teachers aren't able to provide the individualized instruction students need. Using artificial intelligence and other tools like that can benefit students. But the point I want to make is from the work of the American scholar Safia Noble, that artificial intelligence is a human rights issue. And even the most advanced digital systems are still built by humans and subject to the same kind of biases and errors that we as humans are. And I think there's a really critical role that policymakers and government leaders can play in making sure that these conversations about digital innovation are starting now to think about the ethics of algorithms, the biases that can be built into them, and making sure that we're very carefully overseeing the use of these tools in ways that ensure we're protecting the people who need it most.
Okay, so that was excellent. So that AI point is so important. So I know you use it on edX, don't you, with engineers, but I think Boeing, I think I saw it, but it's just so, like, if you're crowdsourcing material and you want to understand the quality issue or the depth of learning, AI tools are really quite genius. But I mean, that's when you get the basics right, then you can do these add-ons. So finally, Amanda Abron actually was, first I'd like to thank her in putting all this together and helping us. So she's part of my team, but she also is a program manager in Global Schools. So I'll give you the sweeper role, Amanda, if you want to say a few words.
Yes, thank you so much, Paul. So I just want to take this opportunity just to discuss a little bit of digital innovation in the primary and secondary classroom as a former teacher, also to bring in the youth perspective and really discuss the youth-led digital teacher training that we've developed at Global Schools and how we've seen technology as a mechanism to really provide teachers with high-quality professional development on sustainable development. So UNESCO estimates that we need about 70 million more teachers by 2030. And according to the OECD, teacher shortages actually can be combated by offering short-term teacher training that allows teachers to access formal professional opportunities. And last year, UNESCO did a very interesting study that found that teachers want to teach sustainable development, but they really don't know how. So I'm really privileged to hear what everyone is already doing on this, on open access resources, on providing courses. So I just want to highlight one solution that we have created to fill this teacher gap. So we've created the Global Schools Advocates Program, which is a digital training all on edX via the SDG Academy. It's also offered on WhatsApp as a way to train teachers across 92 countries, reaching those in remote areas through low data approaches and also through local facilitators. And the training was built with the purpose of having high quality content, good pedagogical practices, digital competencies, and it's also implemented by a core staff team of youth in 10 countries, so it really is youth-led. And this past year, we reached about 500 teachers to train them on education for sustainable development, place-based learning, active pedagogy, and really how to incorporate local knowledge on the SDGs into their lessons, as I know that's been a big theme from this conversation as well. So these teachers directly reached over 100,000 students, and the program also has a trainer of trainers model, and they reached about 12,000 teachers through the trainer of trainers model, and they also trained over 30,000 community members on how to be advocates for transformative education. So we've seen this method of digital teacher training being really transformative. We've seen improved attendance at schools in Tanzania because teachers are now doing project-based learning and primary students want to come to school. We've also seen reports of increased teacher motivation across the whole of school in Nigeria. And we have over 500 stories of basically stories of change in this aspect. So really, as we're going forward, we're looking for ways to work together to continue scaling digital innovations, we encourage you to go on globalschoolsprogram.org. We are an initiative of SDG Academy. We do have an open access global citizenship curriculum on our website with 60 lesson plans on sustainable development in 11 languages. And we really want to continue making things free, open access, and available to all. So it's our goal to reach about 10 million students through key partnerships with national governments, teacher training institutions, and local organizations, because we really believe teachers are at the heart of the classroom with the power to inspire the next generation. So I know we are at the time, but I do encourage you to go on to globalschoolsprogram.org. And thank you so much, Paul, for allowing me to speak a bit about the teacher training.
No, that's great. And of course, the digital transfer, it's not just about, we focused a lot on curriculum and access to curriculum, but the other side is the teacher training and the pedagogy and those sort of things, and how the digital world can actually, so the work that Amanda's done with Global Schools and Sam there is truly remarkable. So just to end it, I think the term, it takes a village to educate a child. Honestly, I think it probably takes governments, private sector, academia, library, civil society. It takes everyone at that level to really make this work, and also cooperation across countries, right? So it's a mammoth task, but this is why we're here. This is why we believe in multilateralism. This is why we want to coordinate across nations and across partnerships. But I think the good news, I would agree with Radhika, is that it's not 2030 or 2050. Actually, this could be done really quickly. Like we saw during COVID, how teachers and academics and others just stepped up and just did it when they had to do it, when it was mandated. And this could be the same. You know, once the ministers and the policy is in line and resourced a bit, you would see remarkable transformation coming through communities and teachers and universities and others, because we already showed this during COVID, so we can do it for education, for sustainable development. Okay, so I'm going to stop now, and thank you for coming. I'm sorry for being a bad chair, but hopefully you've got lots of information. If there's anything of interest, come to me and we'll link you to the speakers and to any of the resources that you're particularly interested in. Okay, so thank you. And thanks for everyone joining the webcast.